All right, so we are going to get started here. So my name's Anne Marie. If you're just starting to watch these for the first time, we will have review sessions every Thursday for Stat 100 at 8:30. And midterm weeks, we'll switch it around a little bit just so that everyone can make it to them. So we'll go ahead and do a quick review of our week's lessons, and then we'll have some just some practice problems at the end. So yeah, let's get started. So one thing we talked about this week is experimental and observational studies. So those are two different types of studies that we have that basically just have different aspects to them for what we're going to do to the participants or not do. So experimental means the researcher is doing some sort of manipulation to the subjects. So this could mean it just means they're imposing some sort of treatment. So they're either a researcher could be giving medicine to their participants, so that would be imposing a treatment. Or maybe if a researcher's putting a different type of soil into a garden instead of the old one, that would be imposing a treatment. So we also call it a scientific study because it's kind of like if you think of science, usually, you're doing some sort of experiment there to change what's going on. And then usually we want to randomize these groups so that there's not a bias going on there. So these groups, if they're randomized, then that's going to take away the possibility of a confounding variable, which we'll talk about next after we talk about observational studies a little bit. So observational studies I liken it to people watching. It's basically just a natural state of affairs. We just kind of watch and see what's going on, and we don't impose any sort of treatment. So yeah, like I said, let's say you have a bunch of rats that you're researching. It's kind of gross, but if you have a bunch of them, and then all you do is observe them and like their activities, that would be observational because you're not doing any sort of treatment. You're just watching them to see what's happening. This does run the risk, though, of confounding variables because since you're not randomizing your the different variables and your participants, there runs a chance that there's some sort of bias going on. There's like a third variable that could be affecting your data. So in order to control for that, you do want to try to randomize your participants, and that's called a randomized experiment. So basically experimental studies is what I was saying. They're the ones that are going to control for that. All right, so we'll quickly go over the different things that you should keep in mind when you're asking research questions. So deliberate bias is basically just saying if you're asking a research question, you want specific data, so you're biased towards that data set and what answers you want. So then the way you're asking the question is kind of, pushing towards that. Filtering is basically when you have certain choices, such as like undecided, I don't know. These would be if you don't have them in there, then you're filtering for like yes or no. So you're kind of pushing your participants to say some sort of answer specifically. So that's not good. You want to make sure that, if a participant doesn't know, that they're not forced to choose yes or no, because that's not really going to be representative of their actual opinion if they don't know. Importance of order. Basically, this is just saying that the order that your answers are in, like A, B, C, D, E, whatever, does matter. If it didn't, then if we switched up the order, there wouldn't be a difference in the responses, but it has been shown that if the order switched up, there is a difference in what type of responses we get. So there is an importance in order there. Anchoring is basically when we would be your participants' perceptions are going to be distorted if they have a reference point. That's going to be your anchor. So they want to stay close to the anchor if they don't know. So they're going to assume, this is all I know because this is what I got from the question. So this is what I'm going to lean towards. So anchoring is like another way of bias because it's going to be pushing people towards something that they're not even educated on. So that's not going to be an accurate response there. Unintentional bias is basically if you were to put words in your STEM such as like forbid, ban, outlaw. So people are going to tend to oppose those questions, say no to them because they don't want to be told what to do. That's just like human nature. So they're usually going to say no to those because they don't want to be forbidden to doing something. So that's where unintentional bias can come from. And then unnecessary complexity, basically this is making the respondent consider more than one subject at once. So it's basically if you ask a question and it's really complex and you're looking at one thing here and another thing here, then the answer that your respondent may give may only be representative of what they think about one of those subjects, or they get confused because there's another one. So the way to fix this, you just want to make sure that each category or each subject that you have is going to be a separate question, so that whatever response the respondent gives is going to be representative of that subject specifically. So you're asking the uninformed is just going to be if you ask a question and the person doesn't know what it means, they're not going to be able to answer honestly. They're just going to probably just guess because they don't know. And then also so that's a way of making it too complex, because if you don't provide a definition, people are going to be ignorant about it and they just don't know. And then a double negative would be if you use just two negative words in a row. So disagree and not, you should not disagree. So that would kind of be like, do you agree? So that makes it confusing. You could have just said it like that you agree, or like not disagree. That's just awkward. So yeah, you just don't want to have more than one subject in the stem there, and that'll because that's where it goes back to unnecessary complexity, because you don't want to have that many subjects. It'll make it confusing in that way. Okay, so variables. We have two different types of variables. Variables obviously vary. It's where the name comes from. So we have categorical and quantitative. Categorical are just going to be labels, groups, so anything like flavors, colors, just any type of grouping like that. And you're going to have nominal and ordinal. Those are two different types of categorical variables. So they're still labels or groups, but ordinal has a hierarchy and nominal doesn't. So nominal is things like brands of something, flavors. You don't have to put one brand of something above the other. Theoretically, that there's not an order to them. In comparison, we have ordinal, so there's some sort of order. So these could be things like school years, like freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. Or elementary school, middle school, high school. They're all they're still labels, but they have some sort of hierarchy. Elementary school comes before high school, but they're still categorical variables, just with some sort of order. And then quantitative variables take on some sort of value. So they're always going to, 0 is always going to be less than 10 in quantitative variables. And then we do have discrete and continuous variables. So if you're counting something and it can only take on a set number of values, that's going to be discrete. So if you're counting like the number of people in your math class, that's going to be discrete. You can only have whole numbers. You can't split people in half, so that's going to be a discrete variable. And then in comparison to continuous, usually you just think of measurements in this case, because measurements can take on any positive number, so like 0 to whatever. So like heights, weights, you can have any decimal of them. So that would be a continuous variable there. Okay. All right, so samples and populations, basically, this is one of the basis of statistics, because our whole point of statistics is to understand populations, but since it's hard to collect data from them, we take samples from our population, and then those samples are where we actually collect the data to make inferences about our population. So basically what we have here, it's going to be our select group that's chosen from the population as our sample. So I usually draw this in some sort of cycle. So we'll have our population, and then from that population we'll take a sample. So we get a sample down here. And then we're going to take data from it, make inferences, and then after we get that information, the inferences that we make are going to be about our population. So inferences, for instance. Okay. So that's kind of how it works. We have a population, take a sample from it, get data from that sample, and whatever information we get from there, we're going to make inferences about our population. All right. So yeah, our statistics, or our sample statistics, are going to be variable because whatever sample we take out, it should be random, so it's going to change every time. And we do want it to be representative, though, because if our sample is going to make an inference about the population, we want it to be representative. So we want to make sure it's random so that it brings a little bit of everything and kind of represents population. And parameters and statistics, all that is just those are going to be the different, they're the measurements of each. So a parameter is a measurement of a population. Statistic is a measurement of a sample. And those are just going to be, they're always going to go together in that way. Populations are always parameters. Samples are always with statistics. You'll never have like a sample parameter or population statistic. That's not a thing. So make sure to pair them up in that way. All right, so let's do some review questions here. So if you're watching this back on YouTube, basically, I'll read the question and then go ahead and pause the video, think about it, and then hit play again so we can go over it together. So our first one says, which type of response bias is the most dominant in the following survey question do you read? So go ahead and look at this one, see what you think. Okay, so okay, so our answer to this one's going to be B. So let me circle that. So remember, B, unintentional bias, is when the wording doesn't really tell you what's going on. So it's going to confuse the person as to what they're answering, basically. So the wording doesn't clearly state what type of reading is of interest right now. Is it newspapers? Is it websites? Is it like nonfiction? Is it talking about is the question asking like, do you read in general? Or is it saying, do you know how to read? Do you read often? So it's very ambiguous. So that's going to be unintentional bias there because the wording of it is just doesn't really tell you much. So people are going to respond probably in different ways depending on how they interpret the question themselves. Okay. Still getting this thing worked out. Let's see. Okay, so number 2. So what type of variable is automobile make? So for like Ford, Chevrolet, Toyota. So go ahead and look at these. Go ahead, pause the video if you're watching it back, and then we'll go over it. Okay, so our answer to this one's going to be A. So you can probably tell right away, obviously, because this is going to be a categorical variable because these are different labels. And they don't have any sort of value associated with them. Like Chevrolet isn't worth like 1 and Ford 2. So we know it can't be B or C because that's saying measurement. So we know these aren't true. So you could choose A off of that. But also to keep in mind that this is nominal because these can take on any like order. So you can have Ford before Toyota and Toyota before Chevy, whatever. It still makes sense. So it's going to be nominal because it can't take on any order. So it's not ordinal. All right. All right, number 3. So the importance of randomized experiments is that they what? So go ahead and pause and see what you think about this one. Okay, so basically, so randomized experiments, the answer to this one's going to be C, because if you have a randomized experiments, it's important because it can give you inferences about cause and effect. It doesn't mean cause and effect. You can't make that conclusion, but it can infer that. A, it doesn't require large sample size. That's not the importance of it. And then B, it's saying to observe which units are in each group. It says observe. This is an experimental idea, so it can't be that one. So obviously it's not none of the above. So our answer would be C, because if you have that experiment and you're doing randomized experiments, it's going to be representative of the population, so then you're able to make a more accurate conclusion about the causation. Okay. All right. Number 4, okay, to conduct a proper statistical study, a statistician must what? Okay, so our answer to this one is going to be D, all of the above. So let's go through them. So A, I have a sample which is fully representative of the population. So this is an important point. Remember, we do always want to have a sample representative of the population because we're trying to find information about the population. So whatever we're taking data from should be representative of that, even though it's smaller. So A is true. That's not the answer, but it is true. B, it's also true because you do want to have a large sample size in order for to make sure that's representative and you have enough going on there. So that's true. And then C is going to be decide whether or not that study is an observation or not, because you want to make sure that you're finding out if you're going to be imposing a treatment or not. We talked about this in one of the other reviews. So you want to make sure you decide if it's an observation or not, so you're sure about what type of manipulation or what type of not manipulation, what type of observation you're doing. So all these are true, so that would be D. Okay. Okay, number 5. So suppose a study found that African violets treated with a new plant food had more blossoms than those that did not receive the new food. Which of the following is most likely? Go ahead and read through these. Okay, so A is going to be our answer. It is going to be an experiment because they're treating it. There's some sort of treatment going on. So we know that it can't be C or D because that's saying observational, which is not true because there's some sort of treatment. So we will be between B and A. And it says that the new plant had more blossoms than those that did not receive the new food. So since they randomized it, then we're able to make some sort of inference about that. So since it was an experiment, and then that means that we can make that sort of causal inference about it. So B is saying that you can't make that inference, which is untrue because since it was an experiment, we can do that as long as it's randomized. So our answer would be A there. Okay. All right, number 6 is our last one. So which type of bias is most dominant in the following survey question? Do you support the polluting of our groundwater through fracking? Okay, so our answer to this one is going to be B. So remember, B is going to like when the wording is kind of suggesting a specific answer that you should do. For example, like if they were to say like there is a good reason to exercise, you know, that's suggesting that it is good. In this case, it's saying, do you support polluting of our groundwater? So it has that like connotation there, support the polluting of our groundwater. So that's kind of pushing it towards being deliberate bias because it's basically stating what they kind of want the person to say in that case. So answer would be B. All right, so you can go ahead and check out this. Obviously, if you're watching this back, we have our YouTube channel. Our next review is going to be next Thursday at 8:30 for lesson 3. And yeah, we'll hope to see you guys next week. Have a great night.